Nothing. It's perhaps the most painful one-word answer in a long marriage. You see the man you love, the man you've shared a lifetime with, retreating behind a wall of silence. You can feel the distance growing between you like a quiet, creeping frost. You ask him what he's thinking, what's wrong, what you can do, and you are met with that hollow echo, nothing. But you know deep in your heart that it isn't nothing. It's a chasm of unspoken fears, regrets, and a profound sense of loss he simply cannot name. If you are a woman living in that quiet echo, feeling unseen and lonely next to the person you love most, this conversation is for you. We are about to pull back the curtain on why he has shut down, and it is not what you think. Hello, my dear friends, and a very warm welcome back to Elderflowerings. I am so deeply honored that you have chosen to be here for what I know is one of the most challenging and ultimately one of the most empowering conversations we can have. The quiet emotional withdrawal of a husband in his later years is a painful reality for so many women, and it often leaves you feeling powerless, confused, and deeply hurt. It is so natural to want to react, to push for answers, to get angry, to remind him of the connection you once had. But what if the key to understanding, and perhaps even gently reopening the door, isn't in pushing harder, but in understanding more deeply? In this in-depth discussion today, we are going to explore 5 powerful truths behind why many older men seem to shut down emotionally. These reasons are rarely about a lack of love for you. In fact, they are often rooted in his own fears, his societal conditioning, and a sense of loss that he has never been given the language to express. This is a guide for the loving partners who are trying to understand. It is not about making excuses for hurtful behavior, but about building empathy, because only from a place of true understanding can we ever hope to find a new way to connect. My sincere hope is that by the end of our time together, you will see the man you love not as a fortress to be conquered, but as a person who may need a gentle, patient, and loving hand to help him find his way back both to you and to himself. Why older men shut down emotionally. 5 truths their wives need to know. Truth number 1. The crushing weight of a lost identity. For many men of the generation now in their 70s, 80s, and beyond, their identity was forged in the crucible of their work. For 40 or 50 years, they were defined by what they did. They were the provider, the engineer, the manager, the teacher, the builder. Their daily routine, their social standing, their sense of competence, and, crucially, their very sense of self-worth were inextricably linked to their role as a working man. Then comes retirement. While it may be looked forward to, its arrival can trigger a profound and disorienting identity crisis. The phone stops ringing with work-related calls. The daily problems to be solved vanish. The sense of being a vital, contributing member of a team disappears. Suddenly, a man who knew exactly who he was for 5 decades wakes up in the morning and asks himself, "What am I for now?" The emotional shutdown. This feeling of purposelessness, of irrelevance, can be terrifying. And because many men from this generation were conditioned to believe that expressing fear or vulnerability is a sign of weakness, they cannot articulate this profound loss. They can't say, "I feel lost now that I'm not a lawyer anymore," or "I feel useless now that I don't have a project to manage." That level of emotional honesty is often completely inaccessible to them. So what do they do instead? They shut down. They retreat into silence. They might spend hours upon hours in front of the television, not because they are particularly interested in the programs, but because its noise fills the void left by their lost purpose. They might tinker endlessly in the garage or the basement, not just as a hobby, but as a way to feel competent and in control of a small, manageable world. They might become withdrawn and quiet at family gatherings because they no longer feel they have a relevant role to play. What his partner sees? From the outside, this can look like deep apathy, a complete lack of interest in life, or even a rejection of the family itself. A wife might think, "He doesn't want to talk to me anymore. He doesn't care about anything." But what she is often witnessing is not a lack of caring, but a profound and painful grieving process for a lost identity that he has no tools to express. He isn't shutting her out intentionally. He is shutting down because he feels he has lost himself. Understanding this is the first, most compassionate step. Truth number 2, the unspoken terror of physical decline. The second truth is deeply tied to the traditional concept of masculinity that so many older men were raised with. Their emotional withdrawal is often a direct shield against the terror of acknowledging their own physical vulnerability. Throughout their lives, men are often socialized to equate their worth with their physical strength, their capability, and their ability to endure without complaint. They were the ones who opened the tight jars, who carried the heavy boxes, who projected an aura of physical resilience. Then, inevitably, age begins to introduce changes. Aches and pains become more persistent. Strength diminishes. Walking up a flight of stairs might leave him winded. He might struggle with a task that was once effortless. His sexual function may change. A health scare might introduce a new, frightening level of dependency. For a man whose identity has been subconsciously linked to being physically strong, these natural changes can feel like a profound personal failure, a deep and abiding shame. The emotional shutdown. It is incredibly difficult for many men of this generation to talk about these fears. Admitting physical weakness can feel like admitting a fundamental failure of their manhood. It is a deeply vulnerable act they have been conditioned their entire lives to avoid at all costs. It is far easier and feels far safer to shut down emotionally than it is to say, "I'm scared because my body doesn't feel reliable anymore," or "It hurts my pride that I can't lift that for you," or "I'm worried about my health and it frightens me." So, instead of sharing this vulnerability, which could be a powerful point of connection, he might become irritable or grumpy, lashing out when asked about his health as a defense mechanism. Refuse to go to the doctor, denying that there's a problem because facing it is too frightening. Withdraw from physical activities he once enjoyed, not just because they are difficult, but to avoid having his new limitations be seen by others, especially by his partner. What his partner sees? She sees a man who is suddenly grumpy, stubborn, and seems to have given up. She might get frustrated, saying, "Why won't you just go to the doctor?" Or, "Why are you always in a bad mood?" She is responding to the outward behavior without understanding the deep well of fear and perceived shame that is fueling it. He's not just being difficult, he's often terrified of his own mortality and the loss of the physical identity he once knew. Truth number 3, the echoes of lifelong emotional conditioning. This third truth is perhaps the most deeply ingrained and the hardest to change. For many men of the senior generation, emotional shutdown is not a choice made in the present. It is the culmination of a lifetime of conditioning. Think about the messages boys and young men of the 1940s, 50s, and 60s received about masculinity and emotion. They were often taught, both overtly and subtly, a very specific set of rules. Big boys don't cry. Don't be a sissy. Tough it out. Handle it yourself. "Don't talk about your feelings. It's a sign of weakness." For decades, they practiced and perfected the art of emotional suppression. They learned to bury their fear, their sadness, their anxiety, their confusion deep inside, and to present a stoic, capable, and unfaltering face to the world. The emotional shutdown. This conditioning doesn't just vanish with retirement. In fact, it can become even more pronounced. Later life is often filled with events that naturally trigger deep emotions. The grief of losing friends and loved ones, the anxiety of health challenges, the sense of loss from retirement, the fear of the unknown. When these powerful feelings surface, a man who has spent 70 or 80 years learning not to feel or express them often has no other coping mechanism than to do what he has always done: build a wall. He literally does not possess the emotional language or the practice skills to articulate what is happening inside him. He can't say, "I feel a profound sense of grief and loneliness today," because he was never taught how. He can't say, "I'm feeling anxious about our future," because that would violate a lifelong rule about being the strong one. So, when his partner approaches him seeking emotional connection and wanting to know what's wrong, his system defaults to its only known safety protocol: shut down. Stonewalling. He might simply refuse to engage in the conversation, staring blankly at the television or walking out of the room. Anger as a shield. He might react with anger or irritation, as it's often a more acceptable male emotion that serves to push intimacy away. One-word answers. The classic "fine," "nothing," "I don't know" are not necessarily lies, but rather honest reflections of his inability to access and articulate the complex emotions churning within. What his partner sees? She sees a man who is cold, uncaring, and unwilling to connect. She feels rejected and stonewalled. She thinks, "He doesn't love me enough to talk to me." But what she is often facing is not a lack of love, but a profound lack of emotional tools, a deficit created by decades of societal conditioning. He isn't choosing not to share. In many ways, he simply cannot. Understanding this conditioning can be a turning point. It allows us to see the silence not always as a personal rejection, but sometimes as a reflection of a lifetime of emotional training. It calls for immense patience from us as partners. Truth number 4, the unbearable weight of past regrets. The fourth truth delves into the inner world of memory and reflection. Sometimes, an older man's emotional withdrawal is a defense mechanism against the overwhelming and often painful process of life review, particularly concerning past regrets. Later life is naturally a time of reflection. The quiet hours of retirement provide ample space for the mind to wander back through the decades. And while this can bring many joyful memories, it can also bring to the surface long-buried regrets. Career choices, financial mistakes, words left unsaid to a parent who has passed, or, perhaps most painfully, regrets about his role as a husband and father. He might remember the long hours he spent at work at the expense of family time, the school plays he missed, the emotional distance he maintained when his children were young. The emotional shutdown. For a man who has been conditioned to see himself as a competent provider and a good man, facing these feelings of guilt, shame, or deep sadness can be unbearable. He may not have the emotional tools to process these feelings or the vulnerability to discuss them. The weight of these regrets can feel crushing. So, to protect himself from this internal pain, he shuts down. He actively avoids deep, meaningful conversations, especially those that might touch upon the past, because he fears where they might lead. He might immerse himself in distractions like television, hobbies, or yard work, anything to keep his mind from settling on these uncomfortable truths. He builds a wall of silence, not just to keep his partner out, but to keep his own painful memories and feelings locked away. What his partner sees. She sees a man who seems distant, preoccupied, and unwilling to engage in the kind of deep, reflective conversations that build intimacy in later life. She might try to initiate a conversation about their shared past, only to have him change the subject or become defensive. She might feel that he is emotionally unavailable or that he doesn't value their shared history, when in fact, he may be valuing it so much that the perceived mistakes within it are too painful for him to face openly. His silence is not a sign of indifference, it's often a sign of deep, unprocessed pain. Truth number 5. The discomfort of a shifting power dynamic. This final truth is subtle, complex, and deeply connected to the evolving nature of long-term partnerships. Sometimes, an older man's emotional shutdown is a quiet, often unconscious, reaction to a shift in the relationship dynamic, where he no longer feels he holds his traditional, familiar role. For many couples of the senior generation, their roles were often clearly, if sometimes rigidly, defined for decades. He might have been the primary breadwinner, the decision maker, the one who handled the finances and the big picture things. She might have been the primary caregiver, the household manager, the emotional center of the family. But in retirement, these roles often dissolve. Furthermore, as women age, many experience a wonderful second wind of personal growth. With children grown, they might return to education, discover new passions, build strong social networks of their own, and become more assertive and self-assured. This is a beautiful and healthy evolution. However, for a man whose identity was deeply rooted in his traditional role, this new dynamic can be profoundly unsettling. He may not know his place anymore. If he is no longer the primary provider or the head of the household in the way he once was, he might feel a sense of confusion, insecurity, or even resentment that he cannot articulate. His wife's newfound independence and vibrant social life, while wonderful, might make him feel left behind or less important. Instead of adapting and finding a new, more equitable partnership model, his conditioned response might be to withdraw. He might become sullen or unsupportive of her new interests, subtly communicating his discomfort with the change. He might retreat into silence as a form of passive protest, or because he genuinely doesn't know how to engage in this new dynamic. He might become overly critical of her activities or friends, a behavior often rooted in his own insecurity. What his partner sees? She sees a man who seems unsupportive, jealous, or withdrawn just as she is beginning to flourish. It can feel like a deep betrayal. She thinks, now that I finally have time for myself, why is he pulling away? She may not realize that his withdrawal is not necessarily a rejection of her happiness, but a confused and fearful reaction to the loss of his own familiar identity within the partnership. He is not shutting down to punish her. He is shutting down because the ground has shifted beneath his feet, and he doesn't know how to dance this new dance. How to gently open the door, a path toward reconnection. Understanding these 5 truths, the loss of identity, the fear of physical decline, the weight of emotional conditioning, the pain of regret, and the confusion of shifting dynamics, is the first, most crucial step. It allows us to replace our own frustration with a deep and abiding empathy. But where do we go from here? Forcing a locked door will only cause it to splinter. The key is to create an environment of such safety, love, and patience that he might, just might, feel able to turn the key from the inside. This is a journey that requires immense patience, and there are no guarantees. but here are a few gentle approaches to consider. 1. Shift from face to face to side to side. Direct, emotionally intense, we need to talk conversations can feel like a confrontation to a man who is already feeling defensive. Instead, invite connection through side-to-side activities. Go for a quiet walk together, work on a puzzle, sit in the garden. Conversation often flows more naturally and less threateningly when you are engaged in a shared, gentle activity, not staring at each other across a table. 2. Acknowledge and value his old identity. While you want him to embrace the present, honoring his past can be a powerful bridge. Ask him about his career, about a challenge he overcame at work, about his expertise. Say things like, "I was thinking about how good you always were at X. Could you tell me about that again?" When a man feels his lifelong competence is still seen and respected, he can feel safer and less defensive. 3. Create emotional safety with I statements. Instead of saying, "You never talk to me," which can sound like an accusation, try sharing your own vulnerability. "I've been feeling a little lonely in the quiet lately," or "I sometimes miss the way we used to talk about our dreams." Sharing your own feelings without blame can sometimes give him the implicit permission to acknowledge his own. 4. Focus on appreciation for his presence. Make a point of appreciating him for simply being there. A simple, "It's so nice just sitting here with you," or "I'm so glad we're on this journey together," can be more powerful than any demand for conversation. It values his presence, not just his performance or his words. This path is not easy. It requires you to be the more emotionally aware partner, to have boundless patience, and to manage your own hurt and frustration. But understanding that his silence is often a complex language of fear, conditioning, and unspoken pain, rather than a simple lack of love, can be a transformative shift. It can help you to hold a space for him with compassion, and in that safe space, the quiet possibility of reconnection may, in its own time, begin to take root. Final thoughts. Thank you for joining me on Elderflowerings for this very deep and tender exploration. This is a journey so many of us walk. The goal is not to fix your partner, but to understand him more deeply, and in doing so, perhaps find more peace for yourself and create new possibilities for your relationship. If this conversation resonated with you, I would be so honored if you would share your own experience in the comments. Which of these truths felt most familiar to you? Your story can be a light for another woman who feels she is navigating this in the dark. If you found this video valuable, please show your support by giving it a like, subscribing to Elderflowerings for more compassionate and empowering content, and sharing it with anyone who you feel might benefit from this message of understanding. Thank you for your courage in being here today. Until next time, may you be gentle with yourself, and may you find moments of connection in unexpected places.